and you have been playing around with generative AI, and it's been great brainstorming with you. And so this is a very timely topic about what so many folks are excited, curious about. So please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Eugene. I'm the CTO of UIlicious.com, and what and our startup actually does automated UI testing. And more recently, we also integrated with generative AI to actually automate the generation of UI testing scripts using AI. And this was actually something that has been in work since the startup founded, where we actually been building up the data required and the data sets and all that. And with the very recent changes in AI, as everyone has experienced in the past month, things have changed very rapidly, and we were finally able to get our test generator out and working into the public, and we're starting to get feedback from it. So it's a very exciting time, not just for us as a company, because not we thought that we would need at least 2 or 3 more years to reach this goal, but we finally reached it all of a sudden. But like it's also a very interesting time for me because since I've been working on this AI generative field for over the past few years, it's like things in the past month alone, there has been more papers I've been reading about AI models and generation, right, than the number of papers I read in the past few years. It's all because of the explosion right now. Everyone is rushing it out, and things are moving so fast, right? Like people think it's very fast when you see the open AI and ChatGPT. Things are even faster on the paper side because it's like a, a lot of people are saying we have done this theoretically, but trust us, if you have the computing power, you can replicate this. And yeah, it's very interesting seeing these things moving at this speed. Can't sleep, literally.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that for sure. Could you share a little bit more about how you move from being a developer to being a co-founder and CTO? Obviously, part of that journey was an entrepreneur first, where both of us were as well. So I wanted to hear kind of a little bit about that journey to decide to be a founder.
Mm, so so for me, what my story was actually I've been coding since secondary school, since the Flash days, in the very early. Yeah. So I apologize for the countless of Flash pop up banners I've done. I'm quite sure it annoyed a large percentage of the internet, but I got paid. And the reason why I did that during secondary school was because I wanted to play my Xbox, my PlayStation, and my parents refused to pay anything for it. So so I needed to get money one way or another. And that's how I actually started into programming and development. And and somehow through some strange twist of fate, be it working with basically what was one of my ex teachers, and then I worked on one project or another, I started being passed around from one company to another, and basically it has always been, hey, we need to do something like this. Do you know how? And I'll be like, I have not done in this programming language, but I can learn. And it's like, okay, sure. And that's what I did. And by the end of like JC, so frankly, I needed by the end of JC around there, right? I before university, I was already having a resume and job offers that were better the than the com science graduate pay at the time. And so that's how I actually got into programming, because I basically decided, you know what, since I could anyway get a job at any time in this field, I decided to do the most questionable decision in there. And it's like, you know what, let's just go straight to the startup scene. And I from then on, I've been working from one startup to another. I have worked in some startups that were that actually this was before startup was even a hot word in Singapore. So it was like I was working on, like, one of the startups that I was working on was doing SMS broadcasts. Remember the Singapore Idol era? All the voting system and things like, yes, I was working on those. So things like that. And and somehow I liked the startup scene during the time. I enjoyed it. At that time it didn't really pay that well. And then subsequently I was like, okay, I need to stabilize things. I went into the enterprise scene. So I ended up actually doing software development for pretty much all the major insurance companies in Singapore, except for Aviva. I want to cross that off my list at some point. I hope Aviva at some point buys this. You're delicious, because it's a personal thing. So and then subsequently I got tired about enterprise scene and got very frustrated from the testing problem, actually. So where basically a lot of things were tested manually, and I was like, I had a I had a project that I was working on, mobile app, where basically the CEO misread the mobile app launch date during the AGM, and it was on me and my team to basically rush out the product 1 month earlier. And because we are in the financial industry, no one wants to cut short the testing. So basically, the dev time was cut by a month. So, so I was pissed off of that, and I was like, "Why can't we automate this?" And lo and behold, after that, I was like, "I'm going to do this." So I went back to startup scene, founded UI with my co-founder, and here we are.
There's a lot of noobs out there. They understand there's engineering and then there's product and there's this thing called UI testing, right? Which is your automating. So why is UI testing important for those who are fresh to the scene or, look at it as part of the process?
I think a lot of people already have direct experience more of like why they need it, and especially when it's not there. Like I think a very common frustration is trying to book an airline ticket only for it to have an error. And 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 this is basically, or book a taxi ride and only for it to not actually be able to book, and it's not, it's just an error. And that's very frustrating for a user. And people lose money. More like companies lose money if they fail to actually handle these errors. Even more notoriously, I think like a few years back also, like some of the one of the major financial institute, they made an accounting a software error where basically a zero was missing. That was a lot of no, that was a lot of money that actually went haywire there. So things like that actually cost money in the more literal sense, either on a big scale for major errors, or sometimes it's even just on a much more smaller sense, like um like I think there was one famous case study for, like, I think for one of the burger joints in America, where they had this very low error rate for a certain checkout process, but when someone fixed it, it was because, since it's literally an major America joint, that was like just $1 million in revenue that they gained just by fixing an error. So yeah, testing is important because you want to make sure that your users are happy, and I guess for business owners, you want to make sure that everything is smooth and you actually make your business run smoothly, especially in this era where basically everything's on the internet. And there's so many browsers: Chrome, Firefox, Edge, IE. God forbid, apparently people are still testing that. I know because they use our software to do that. And mobile devices is actually an entire rat's nest on its own. Like, Indonesia, that testing itself is actually a pretty hard challenge, because not only is internet unstable, you have a lot of low-end Android devices with various screen sizes. That is a very complicated form of testing as well. So it's just more of like reducing these errors to make sure that things go smoothly and well. And if your business is important and worth billions of dollars, every fix is worth something.
So how does UI testing happen today, right? From, like, is it a bunch of engineers that load up their iPhones and everything works and that's good to go, or, how does it go happen? Do they outsource that?
So outsourcing is one common situation, especially in Singapore, but in general, it will always be still a large 60 to 80% of the industry still does things very manually. We do have some form of automations here and there with companies like UI, um, but most people are actually still doing it manually, mostly because engineering manpower is expensive. A lot of existing testing tools, for example, um, one of the major ones would be Selenium, requires you to code effectively in a no HTML and CSS in order to write the test. And this has nothing to do with how the things on the screen look like. And I think it's another topic on its own, that engineers have been incredibly expensive and rising costs right now these days, that a lot of companies simply opt to either take a calculated risk or to do it manually. In fact, in my experience with a lot of enterprises, right, what is very common to happen, right, is that before a launch of a major website or app, right, they would conscript the company members internally, the sales team, the salespeople, and so on, and basically you have a bunch of people with all their 100 different devices, and they are all just pressing buttons on the screen manually. And I find that ridiculous, because, like, hey, we're going to talk about AI. So I'm like, we have we have super advanced things, UI frameworks, AI technologies, serverless cloud, whatever you can put in all the high tech buzzwords. And then when it comes to we put everything together, how do we check that it works? 100 people pressing buttons. and and it seems like only a rare few companies can actually at least traditionally, that's what we're trying to change, can afford to actually build the technical teams to fully automate all these things. So big names like, for example, Google, Microsoft, those are companies that are able to fully automate, or Facebook as well. But not everyone is Google, Facebook, or Microsoft. So that hence this weird situation where, despite our progress in technology, we test manually for most parts, and we want to change that. We believe that can be changed.
And you mentioned about how you feel like it's ridiculous humans are doing it, and you're obviously automating to some extent, and yet you're also experimenting with AI. So could you share a little bit about what that transition looks like from your perspective for UI Licious?
So, so the for us, AI has always been one of the more towards the end goal for us, mostly because one of the things that when we launched UI Delicious, there was quite a number of testing tools that tried to incorporate AI early, but we felt that that was misaligned, mostly because most of the common one of the most common problems with test automation is that the argument is that it's very brittle. So what do I mean by brittle? It means, like, for example, if let's say your test is too specific, let's say I test to click this button on this part of the screen, and for some reason the UI designer tomorrow said, I think users would like to press it better if it's on the left hand side, and with just that, your entire login test failed. And basically, if your login test failed, pretty much everything fails. So test automation. One of the reasons why it wasn't commonly adopted easily, it was because it breaks at these kind of very brittle breaking points where humans don't break. Humans were able to automatically adapt to it. And one of the things that AI was very early on in trying to be introduced to testing was that when these things happen, maybe we use the AI to automatically fix the test scripts. This sounds perfectly fine in theory, except that in practice, what we realized, at least at that time when AI was being used, was that hey, if you started automatically fixing tests, then a lot of testers complain, and a lot of project managers complain that sometimes some of the things that were supposed to be bugs got fixed as passed. So at this point, if everything's just automatically fixed to pass, then what's the test for? so, so that was one of the struggles with testing an AI in the early generation when trying to integrate AI. So what we tried to do differently was that we looked at it fundamentally. It's like, no, the problem is not actually on fixing the test scripts or 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 after it has run, because we felt that if, let's say, your test scripts are designed in a way that was stable and reliable, you shouldn't need to be constantly fixing the test script. So that's what we actually did first without AI. Ironically, we wanted to make the test script system reliable, and in a way that any tester can view the report and say, hey, this makes sense, I understand it, this passed. And that was something that was very critical for us. Then after we did that, that was what we initially did during the first few years. After we did that, we wanted to actually tackle the second part of the problem, which is to write test scripts. So a lot of people would have very loosely defined test scripts. Like, if you look at the manual testing world, they'll be like, for example, take for example, how will you write a test script? You'll be like, hey, go to this website, click on these buttons, check everything. You'll probably write in English. Even though UI-licious is a testing language, you probably won't write in our syntax. And that's where that next step we felt makes sense, because that is where a lot of people has already their test scripts for manual testers, but written in plain English that they pass around as notes, as Excel spreadsheets, as Google Docs to do this and that. And we wanted to be able to take that, copy and paste it over, and translate it into a more formal testing programming language, which then can be verified that, hey, these are all the correct steps, make the tweaks, and then let it run. So that was something that we tried to build up over the years with the data set, and something that we are finally glad to actually manage to reach, at least the first working version, that we felt that was something that the public could start using, and that was an exciting thing for us.
That brings up, of course, to the news of the year, right? Which is generative AI, Chat GPT, OpenAI. So, what do you think happened, right? Because it felt like AI was like this, linear path, right? Which is it's always coming, but it's not here, right? And then suddenly over the past year, it just feels like, whoa, like it kind of like did a little bit of a hockey stick in terms of real life applications, but also I think awareness, right? At least amongst the tech ecosystem, right? As something that's like much closer than thought, right?
Mm.
So what do you think happened there for those who are new to this?
So one of the things that I found very amusing during the past few months, because it was a very I think it's a very in hindsight moment for the industry. So, uh, one of the trends that we had, right, in neural networks was like to try expand the data. I mean, we probably have heard this: expand the data, make it bigger. Uh, it seemed to be somewhat better, but it wasn't a hockey stick better. It was kind of more like linearly better. And one of the things that was very interesting that happened recently was that what we were doing previously with at least some of these very large scale AI models specific is that we were basically training it with a very broad set of skills that is at the very low level. And so think of it as like if I were to do a university grading. So for example, you have a university level AI in a topic, and basically a primary school level in a topic. We were basically training the AI to be a primary school level at everything under the sun. So that made what people felt was very not that practical and useful. But I would argue that actually at that point in time we did not notice it, but it was already it laid the foundation, because what happens is that when primary school became secondary school and secondary school become JC, how many of us can say that we have a secondary school or JC knowledge at every topic under the sun, at every language under the sun? For example, my chemistry is terrible, my biology is terrible, things like that. Like I I honestly don't think I'm any better than the AI in those topics. And the other major thing that we realize is that, okay, why don't we start focusing down on one of these big models, right? And let's just narrowly just train it to be really good at one thing, which is basically following instructions. And this is what OpenAI did. They call it reinforcement human learning. That's the more technical segment. I think someone can search it up if they are more interested. But the thing is an instruction GPT. But basically, the key thing is we taught it how to obey instructions, like how we taught a primary school kid to obey instructions from a parent all the way to secondary to JC. And overnight, these two factors just clicked in, because now you had trained someone who is able to follow instructions, and now you also have someone who had a very broad knowledge of almost everything. As flawed as it is, it's not going to win any university graduate in the topic. It These two things clicked in, like in education, like we call the T model, and it started working together. And it's very funny because for me, it's like we built neural networks using techniques that we understood from the human mind biology, and who would have thought that a neural network model after a human brain would benefit from training and learning like in education the T model the same way a humans does. It was like it's one of those very obvious things when now that we know it and learned it, but it was not obvious previously. So now when we actually use the same techniques that we have learned right into smaller models, we realize actually our smaller models that we have built like a few years ago could actually do much better. And that's why you're seeing a lot of sudden jumps, because like even though OpenAI is like one is like is like at the forefront of it, they have shared what they've done, and people have been taking what they have done and it's like, okay, why don't we try on these other AI models? Like, oh crap, it actually works. It actually makes things much better. And all of a sudden, we have a lot of what was previously not useful AI models being very useful in various use cases. That was literally the case for us. Also, we had an AI model that was spitting out rubbish test code that was not usable, and we made a change, and it's like, oh crap, it's usable. And that was like literally it's overnight in hindsight moment that made such a big change.
So that's interesting, right? Which is that, neural networks on the basis of humans, right? So, I just recently had two daughters. One is 2 years old and one is a 7 month old. And my joke I always tell people is like, I'm also created two neural networks and I'm just watching them slowly engage, explore, realize that some things are hot, the food is too hot, so don't eat it. And then, slowly learn how to blow on the food to, make it cooler. And so, there's a little bit of that. You're kind of watching them kind of go through a little bit of a hockey stick. And suddenly now, I think over the past 1 month, there's a bit of an explosion in the words, right? The hockey shape is starting to come up, right? Last time she's learned like one word a month, and now she's learning like, I don't know, 10 words a week, right? So a little bit of hockey stick. So, how else do you think is similar between, I think, what we said, training humans, training humans wetware neural network versus, training, neural networks or AI? What other parallels do you see, I think, from your perspective?
I would actually say that is actually a very accurate parallel besides the time. So like so it's very funny to be observing AIs making mistakes in the very same way that we actually can observe in humans, or more especially in the growing informative here. Like one of the things I noticed recently, for example, I've been training my cats, for example, to sit down when eating food. So I always ring the bell, tell them sit, and then I only after they sit there I feed them the food. So that worked out for most parts. But one of the common mistakes in AI, and we use the term over overtraining, is that when the scenario is too exact, they may end up learning things to be too specific. So I assume that they were learning to sit properly when I ring the bell. Turns out one day when I didn't lay out their food mat and I ring the bell, they didn't sit. It was the food mat that made them sit, not the bell that tell them. So I was like, oh, overtraining. I've been always training with a bell and the foot mat, and I never noticed it. I always thought it was the bell. So, um, these are mistakes that we will see AI make, and these are things that we will need to fix. But one thing I would say that is very different from a real life human in this case, right, is that in or a cat for that matter, is that once we notice that they learn these things wrongly, we just spend the next few years making the change per se, and then we continue educating them and making incremental improvement. So we just continue moving on from there. For AI models, for AI models, the big difference one of the big difference is that if we notice that we have made some fundamental mistake in the training flow, sometimes the answer would be to go back to the fundamental, like because we can rewind back their learning, their years of learning that we have built up. Okay, for this year to this year, this training that we did, let's just take it out. Then this is all the data, and we just, in a way that is kind of throwing money at the problem, let's just throw enough GPUs at it to just speed up that whole 5 years of progress into 1 month, and burn a lot of electricity in the process. And that is something that is very different that we can't do with real life human beings. Yeah. Is that we cannot go back and reset the process and change things accordingly. Yeah. So if only it was that easy to remove our bad habits.
You've just made a plot for a new dystopian science fiction where a startup does that for humans and it goes horribly right. you know. So, because what are humans without bad habits? They're just like, I don't know, perfect, productive automatons, right? No, and I think that's actually a good point, right? I mean, I was just actually on a WhatsApp group with a whole bunch of VCs and founders, and everybody plays Dota. And what was interesting was that there was a realization that we could ask ChatGPT about Dota strategies. And so everyone was just like, so if we have a Treant, and a Naga, what are the odds of us winning? And then the answer was actually pretty good, right? I mean, and after that, we were like, okay, high skill rating of like 600 versus a high skill rating of 700. What's the difference in terms of like play style and approach, who's more likely to win. And it was a really good answer. I mean, and the awkward reality I was thinking about it as I was reading it was I actually can't tell the difference about whether it's a good answer or bad answer because I'm more of an amateur in Dota than the ability for me to tell the difference, right? Whether it's correct or how it could be better, right? Versus, of course, on the topics that I have been plugging into it on myself, which has been more like, hey, tell me about I don't know the ethics of AI or predictions of AI inside startups. Because I'm an expert on it, it's more obvious for me when the errors are there, right? Or what needs to be unlearned or relearned or corrected or edited. And I thought it was an interesting dynamic, right? Because I was just like you said, there's so many topics that I'm just bad at, like you said, chemistry, biology, things where, if I plug in the chat GPT from a production side, I can tell that there are errors and it can be improved. But from a consumption perspective, if it's an area I'm non-expert on, it's actually very difficult for me to tell if it's wrong actually or even inaccurate. So it feels like there's a quite of an asymmetry there from a human perspective, right? In this I don't know, dynamic to understand AI. I'm curious about what you think.
Yeah, actually, that is something that I actually flag out very heavily. That is probably one of the biggest danger of this current generation of AI. Even the open AI founders themselves also flag it out. It's that because unless you instruct it specifically to not try to lie, or lie might be an extreme word, more of like try to like guess and make its best shot at it. In the industry we call it hallucinations, but basically it's just I don't it's like that very smart kid that doesn't have the answer, and it maybe took a beer and is half drunk, and then it's like, I'm not 100% sure, but he didn't say that, but I think it's this. And that's what the AI will does a lot. And the problem is that because it's a really smart kid, it's it can be really hard to tell. So if you're an expert in this field, for example, and you have really studied up about it, okay, fine, that person is just talking bullshit. Am I allowed to say that? But on the flip side, right? If let's say you're not an expert, right? Um, it's nearly impossible to tell, and that's actually a very scary thing that we actually need to put a giant warning label on this technology on, because, for example, I got it to generate a few recipes just for the fun of it, and it looks very genuine, but I honestly have no idea whether it was good. And so I forwarded it to a few people who actually know cooking, unlike me, who might make the kitchen on fire, and basically one of them said that this recipe will overcook the thing until it's charcoal. And I did not know that, and if I actually followed it, I might have started a fire. So that is actually a very genuine danger for this topic on its own, because it's it's like 50-80%, sometimes you get it right, but you actually need someone to fix the 20. And and it just boils down to, do I actually have the expertise and knowledge for it? And yeah, it's the line that we have to be careful about, especially when we start using this, because there's a lot of talk about using this in education, or this can replace teachers, this can replace doctors and all that. And I'm like, someone needs to be there to make sure that people don't learn the wrong things for the teacher. It's like I was like, the first thing you need to teach a student before they're allowed to use this tool, okay, is that, hey, this thing will come up with bullshit. You need to be able to fact check it, and that's the first thing you need to learn. And from then onwards, it's become super useful, because, hey, I mean, having it right 80% of the time, it's already a first step. It's just about asking a 10, 20, 30 times more question and just going quickly through it, iterating through it. So yeah, that's my take on it, because it's a strange new world we live in, where we have an answer to everything, but it might not be correct.
I mean, the tricky part is that, like you said, is it reminds me of a phrase where it says, you know, a lie can run around the world before the truth can wake up and get its boots on, right? And I was like, this is exactly what's happening, right? Because you can generate so much more content, and then to be able to verify it. I mean, poor Snopes and all these fact checker organizations that are just doing it by hand. I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers, right? And I think the commercial incentive is the part that's really unfair, right? Because if you said, oh, it's a pure marketplace of ideas where every idea would debate based on its merit and honesty, etc., then of course, the truth will, they say like truth will arise and out, right? But that's not true, right? Because in a marketplace of ideas weighted by commercial incentive, weighted by, I don't know, the ability to spam and get as much SEO, for your web page, etc. I feel like the war is just weighted towards not less towards honesty and less towards truth, like you said, but it's like basically going to the rich kid, right? Like you said, not sure. It's like going to the rich kid, basically going up to the smart kid who doesn't really understand it and say, hey, I'm not asking you to lie, but I need you to generate as much BS as possible so that you and I can make money together. And it's a beautiful tag team, right? So I don't know what the end state of that world is going to be.
Oh yeah, those are one of the things that keep me up at night because it's um I mean so pardon if this ends up being too politically or touching a political nerve, is that we already had this problem before AI. Like people were already coming up with bullshit and peddling bullshit for to make money literally, for views and to peddle their own set of products. And this has been an ongoing problem for the past few years, especially in the US in particular. Even Singapore is not immune to it. Also, like sometimes sometimes a lot of us may have the experience of trying to push back against fake news from our uncle, from our grandmas, and so on. Yeah, and trying to correct them, and it's very difficult because it's that lens of credibility, that line. Because one of the most common tactic that will be used is that, hey, this group of people will end up citing other people that as like, hey, I did my research, so I cite so and so and so, but they'll cite each other in a circle effectively to and this forms those kind of bubbles of effectively fake news. And people are already doing that with effectively $10-20 per hour or even less when you contract them offshore in Philippines and so on, and India. People were already doing that. Now we have just changed that $5 an hour bullshit generator to 5 cents an hour, and that's the to me, I feel that it's a topic that's not just within AI because we already had this problem. Now it's just going to be amplified, and I think just in this way we just sped up the roadmap on like how do we deal with this, and I think the biggest irony from what I'm observing, and I'm observing this from myself because now, especially in this topic space, there's a lot of random people talking about random things, speculating from the end of the world to the next renaissance, right? I find myself following more and more specific people rather than actually a lot of aggregation sites. Uh, People who are like experts in their own respective field, like so some AI experts and also some engineering experts who are at the top at their field. For example, Casey Hightower for Kubernetes, Sean for let's say currently more towards AI, but in startup and DevRel, because they will actually be filtering through the noise of the news and presenting it to the audience. And in a way, we have gone full circle into subscribing potentially to expert magazines, though it's not magazines, it's their Substack that I'm subscribing to actually filter out this information for us, which is then is a question right now for me, is this going to be the next phase of how content is created, where basically you have to have trusted and verified content creators effectively, or is the flood of AI content and fake content going to be a norm that we have to get used to? I'm not so sure which direction you'll face. I just hope that maybe we go the full circle route because at least we have a happy ending in that route.
I think it's gonna be both, man. I mean, I remember this phrase I learned about 2 years ago, right? And it was like flood the zone of shit, which is a tactic that was described in politics, which is like, when something that is when something is contrary to what you want to be said, you just flood the zone with just more and more news, and then all the shit basically overwhelms the thing. So if you have 100, like you said, sh- shit pieces, and you have one really good article, everyone's subconscious bias is basically like, oh, if 100 people say it's good, that's the reality. Then that's the new reality, right? Which is how echo chambers happen and everything, right? So I think it's gonna be both, right? I think it's just going to be like the internet's just gonna be full of shit. And then a whole bunch of people are just gonna become like, like it's like, people's like the world is full of Oreos and processed food, and then some people are now fasting in order to avoid processed foods, like going all the other way, right? Um I feel like maybe there's the other way around. Like, most people will just consume everything, all the processed internet, the Oreos of the internet. And then some people, a very small section of people are just going to do like we said, right? Just only follow, I don't know, human verified creators, no AI inside kind of, things.
So this is going to be the information vegan.
Yeah, what a wall, right? I don't know. I mean, what's the what is the solution? Like, what we need to kind of create truth-seeking robots? Do we need to create AI that automatically labels content as AI? I think I started to see that in Reddit. I think, which is like the bots that say like, oh, this content came from somewhere else, right? Which is like source finder. Maybe there should be like what hunter killer robots, AIs that tell you how much AI content is in the text blurb.
Actually, that might not be a bad idea, but not in the case of like okay. So there's one move right now that people are trying to create an AI that detects AI. But honestly, I feel like this is a fruitless cat and mouse game, because the moment that came out, within less than 1 day, someone already figured out how to bypass create tell the AI to generate it in another way that bypasses it. But I think the other one that you have suggested, where basically it does the fact check, that might be a necessary step forward, as a potential way to counteract this. So whenever someone posts something, effectively it does the research on the topic and say, hey, this was said by so and so. Check the citation, or actually, it's this person said something else instead. And is that possible? I believe so, but is that something that's practical? It's actually a lot of computational power needed just to do that. And but it might be the necessary evil or future that we head towards. It's a rare and another thing that actually I find it a bit intimidating sometimes with this progress is that one of the potential dangers right now is that because uh OpenAI right now, for example, they state that their AI has been trained up to this date, 2021. For example, I think one of the things that we have to be careful of is from this day onwards, effectively. If we start training it on the whole of internet, let's say from this day onwards, how are we going to, if we don't filter out the things that people are coming up out of thin air, it's going to be fed into the data, which is then going to be fed to the next AI. And basically, we're going to have AI generating crap that you'll learn from, and you'll just rinse and repeat. And that is going to be something that we need to counteract on with, maybe, let's say, this citation AI or fact checking AI or so on and so forth. Whether this is the best answer, I honestly don't know, because like I think like, look at how people reacted in very violent ways, or very objectionable ways about fact checking systems on Twitter, for example. Like, they viewed it as a form of censorship. So yeah, it's a question that we need to ask as a, I guess, a society, to like, is this what we need to move forward? And honestly, I have no idea on that space. I think we do. I kind of hope not. I kind of hope, like, in on the good side, that we could have just find a better solution. But this might be a necessary evil.
Yeah, it suddenly reminded me of eutrophication. I'm not sure you remember that, about the negative feedback cycle for ponds of water, right, and ammonia. So there's a certain level of ammonia, and the ecosystem normally is a positive feedback loop where it is a homeostasis, it stays in balance. But sometimes if you add a whole bunch of fertilizer, basically the algae just go out of control, and then just eat up everything in the pool. They block up the sunlight, and the whole pool just dies, right? So you just suddenly made me remember, like, this AI thing can just swamp the internet with so much, shit, right? The internet may just basically effectively become unusable, right, for certain purposes like fact facts or honesty, right? And it just kind of kills the thing, and then everybody, I don't know, retreats to, like, I don't know, private messaging channels, right, apps, because at least for now, like, WhatsApp doesn't have too many, it's hard to be a be feed the bot language into the WhatsApp, right, for now, right? So
For
it's a
now.
little bit more, I don't know what, cleaner, right? So it's a good point that you raised about how, like, the internet can kill itself by, I don't know, AI iterating on previous AI generated information. So I guess one question I have is, when you think about that, how do you think engineers and CTOs should build responsibly while being self-aware that there is a bit of an arms race and that someone else is going to do it eventually as well, to some extent? So how do you think about that from, I don't know, code of conduct or stewardship perspective?
Mm, I think this is also one of the hot topics, especially when it came to AI art in particular. But I'm firmly in the camp that we should actually start splitting up very clearly the data collection phase and the AI training phase. So the data collection phase, right, we should learn to recognize it as its own form of phase, and how we do that. And we should, and I would argue for actually that during the data collection phase, we should be handling copyright sensitive material in a very respectful and way. So if let's say the site says no scraping, no scraping. One of the issues that's actually happening right now in the AI space, for example, is that we have an argument that is being made that, hey, since AI learns like a human, even though you have a no scraping rule, it's like a human that visited your website and saw your website and learned from your website. That was the argument that was being made when they merged the two together. So the AI do the script and learn from it directly, and 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 I and they further reinforce that, hey, this is fair use because this AI is now going to be open source and to the public, only for that very same company to have a commercial business that use that open source model and then sell it. So at some point I feel that we may need to start like taking better respect and stewardship to the data that we input, be it for copyright, be it for fake news, be it for false content. And that is something that companies should actually strive for, to bring more transparency on uh, in the process. Subsequently, the next step, right, would be the training side. um we have already reached the point, right, where AI models, right, are reading text, sorry, are learning from text and literature and all that, right, more than 100 times an average human will ever read in their lifetimes. Basically, one of the problems I would say for AI is that it's very inefficient in learning, compared to a human. So for example, if let's say you were to read like one textbook, for example, you already learned your physics to, or chemistry or math to a good degree, maybe with a good teacher as well. Well, for an AI model, maybe one textbook is not enough. Maybe it needs to read like 300 different textbooks to finally understand. Yeah, so that is something that on the training side we can improve on, because so one professor actually jokingly, just for the fun of it, went to like do the projection, like, hey, at the rate we are growing on the amount of data that we need to feed to grow the AI, right, we will run out of words on earth, right, within the next 30 years. Because we've been scaling up at the data side, right, to improve the AI, right, when we actually that we should actually be probably starting to look into improving the efficiency of training the model, so that we don't need the whole of the internet to train the AI model. We probably need something that's closer to what a human would experience in their lifetime. And then from then onwards, if the data demands isn't as huge, then a lot of the ethical copyright concerns can actually be reduced, because then this data can now be being shrunk into a smaller set that is now usable and more verifiable for all parties involved. Yeah. So I think that's a direction that we need to work towards. Whether I'm not so sure how long it will take us. Maybe we will need to read the whole of internet in 30 years first before we actually shrink it down. Yeah, it was very hilarious to read that paper and that graph because it was really just a linear. This is how the industry has been going.
Yeah, I think it's spot on about I don't know data ingestion, right? So right now I can label my web page to like do not crawl, right? So it should not be indexed by a search engine, right? But I'm pretty sure that means that all my past, Blogspot and blogs and Tumblr posts have all been indexed into ChatGPT, for example, right? So, but I think I feel like that's already done. I don't know. I don't know how you can unscramble an omelet and put it back into eggs. Um, so I think looking forward a little bit, obviously, there's obviously we see generative content that's happening in text, right? We see that happening for art. Definitely, I think we see that in video as well, where video filters are doing a tremendous job. I was at a live streaming event by Bigo Live, and it was interesting because I could see the live streamer in real life, and I could see what exactly they look like. And then I could see on the app that they look quite different. In terms of complexion, chin shape, nose dimension. It was kind of crazy to see both of them, those differences. And obviously, I think there's gonna be more and more generative video as well, right? So what do you think is that world? I think I was reading a comic. It's like maybe the end state of this is we end up living in a less human world. And that was by Penny Arcade. He was very depressed. I think we end up with a world full of AI avatars and role models and things like that. What do you think about that? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just like just pretty much any generative content. Even music actually is also another one. There's already been a few models that are out there. I mean, people don't think that it's as good as pop music, but let's just give it time. That's what I would say. But I'll first say the most positive take because since I've been rather negative on for most parts. Uh, I would say the most positive take would be what Sean proposed. One uh one of the tech influencers that I follow is that generative AI could be potentially portals to new worlds. So so I experimented this on another podcast as well with a fellow entrepreneur where basically we use the AI to say, hey, let's do an adventure in this world and you can just imagine it along those lines. So, for example, if let's say a Star Wars chapter from this episode to this episode, maybe even a specific book or a Harry Potter universe or a Star Trek universe on this planet, like you can because since the literature was there and the AI learned from it, you can actually generate stories in that world in that flavor, and this is more like things that the AI already learned. Uh, moving it forward, we could potentially see in a positive sense that artists, or be it artists or game designers, obviously world builders effectively at this point, uh, design these worlds, right, by instructing the AI that, hey, instead of this, I prefer it this way to just create these virtual worlds for people. And we're going to see like very different worlds accordingly. Um, whether that's through a metaverse headset, which maybe not, or maybe just the LCD screen. Even that would be interesting. That's another question. But the most positive take would be we will get to see a new way to experience entertainment, like in the form of video games, but in a lot more. Like even without going that full 9 yards, where basically the AI generate the whole world and the stories and the characters and everything, even on a much smaller scale, I'm actually kind of looking forward to the next 2 to 3 years in indie gaming. Because one of the most common problems for some of indie gamers, at least the games creators, at least the smaller studios, was, hey, I cannot create art assets. I got the story I can think of. I can make that game interaction game engine, and actually I do like playing some of the indie games. But now that they effectively have an AI art generator, or even let's say a conversation generator, they these indie games can actually have the tools to create something very new and very vast at their fingertips. Like take conversation, even like random NPC conversations. The reason, in particular, NPCs and not humans, because I realized players like to come up with things to mess up the system. Players are like the worst rebels because we are like do terrible things like destroy the shop or things like that. But like NPC to NPC interactions can be a lot more lifelike in these worlds, and that is not using new technology. It's literally using what we have now. You can, I mean, people have done it for fun already. Get two AI bots to just talk to each other, and you can just see a conversation, pretend to be two different characters, and they just talk to each other. And that was actually, it was a really interesting thing to see that. And I'm like, man, this will come into games. Uh, Small art assets conversation, 3 5 years, entire worlds. I don't know, 10 20 years. That that is what I think in that positive angle. In yeah.
So, wrapping things up here, could you share with us a time that you personally have been brave?
Oh, I think I touched on this. Wait, so my parents were Asian, uh, and and yeah, I think one of the hardest thing that I decided on early on was to not go to university. My and to literally just embark on the path to a startup, and this was many years ago. Uh, Before even startup was a thing. I mean, we don't even have blocks anyone in the area yet and things like that. So it was like it was it was a very strange thing for my parents to grapple with, because they like with a lot of Asian parents, they actually grew up with the fundamentals of, hey, get to university, get a job. And I decided to choose otherwise. And it may not necessarily sound like one of the bravest thing, like in terms of like adversity, but to go against your parents, it was something that was personally difficult. Um, and it was personally a challenge for me, because like being an entrepreneur, or subsequently like doubling down on a startup. Like, it was one thing to be a startup employee, it's another thing to be a startup founder. um to go down that route was that um was that because it's not a common thing until more recent years, is that your whole family assumes the default failure, and that was difficult. Your friends, a lot of them did so as well. And 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 that was something that I found personally challenging, to which I'm actually glad actually now that in more recent years have changed very drastically. Uh, Extremely drastically, because of how startups are now more accepted in the mainstream right now, as a potential career path. Because quite frankly, we have been starting to see successful startups, be it Grab, be it Food Panda, and so on and so forth. Like, if people start to recognize these things, and we started moving away from the MNC mindset. And yeah, and then I think I credited, like, there was only one family member that was really supportive of me. And it was that isolation feeling that actually felt very difficult. Things have gotten much better with my parents, naturally, over the years, as basically people became more accepting of startups. And yeah, that was something that I've struggled with.
Thanks so much for sharing. I want to actually ask about how you're using artificial intelligence to bring it into the product for UI Licious, and what exactly are the learnings that you've had from there.
So, one of the things that I actually realized from using artificial intelligence into bringing it into the product is I actually realized that one of the difficulties is actually trying to figure out the use case, and it's something that a lot of people lapse in. This is a completely new technology that a lot of us do not know what we are going to use it for. Um, like jokingly, like I think I mentioned at the start of the podcast, was that I was quite nervous for this, and someone told me to, like, hey, why don't you just come up with a list of questions so that you can better prepare in your head what could happen. And then I don't know what's the list of questions because I have no idea. And I was stuck at it for a week. Then basically that friend eventually said, "Then you just ask ChatGPT." Then I was like, "Oh yeah, crap." I was we already the topic that we wanted to talk about was AI, right? And I've been staring at it for an entire week, and I'm like, "Hey, it's actually we could have just asked it." And so it's that very obvious thing that you didn't know until you realize it, and that was what I actually felt that a lot of people need to start thinking in the ways of trying to like, hey, how can we apply it? One way that I actually try to phrase it is think of it as a intern. That was one of the most practical ways to put around it because an intern you never expect it to be 100% right. You expect it to get it wrong. You expect to need to fix their work. uh, an intern is also someone that when you come in, you may need to give it some basic pointers and training. You need to prepare like, hey, these are the instructions, same way as you need to do for the AI bot. And an intern is also someone who, if you can properly set up the process around, can actually bring a lot of value to your company. And and as long as we use that as a framing, right, I believe that actually a lot of founders can find ways to actually use AI that are not so obvious. So for us, it was to create test scripts. We are also exploring other means to using the AI, for example, as our first frontline in customer support, and we are also doing additional tooling into the product. So be it whenever you need to do our end goal for UI listers is that, hey, all you need to do is tell UI listers, I want to test this website at this URL, and we should come up with a test plan. This is not yet done yet. Test plan. Hey, I'll test this. Is this good for you? Then you say yes, and then it will just generate all the test scripts. Okay, these are the tests. I ran it. These are the results. We want it to be that seamless, and it's all about connecting the dots with different AIs along the way. On the technical side, in order to use AI actually, there are just three very big major techniques. Be it this is one is what you already been doing in ChatGPT, providing some instructions, and that's just basically prompt engineering, and then they do the rest. The other one is embedding, which is basically to do use AI to do searching, which then you can be used to combine with the first AI. And the third one is fine tuning, basically AI with custom data, which is the most complicated, but it is also something that can be the most useful for, let's say, things like medical field, because you can train it on medical data specifically and make it a medical expert. Um, and once you start understanding these are the three basic building blocks and treat it like functions that you can link together, you can start to realize that, hey, actually there's a lot of different combinations of use cases. It's just a matter of, do we have the time to build it? And I and that's what I'm doing for the UI testing industry. And I think a lot of people can do this for other industries, industries that I have completely no relation to. So that's why it's something that I would encourage to explore, or at least thinking in those terms, like the intern. I use the intern model a lot because interns need to be paid. That's why I like to remind people. The AI is not cheap. so so treat it like an intern.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd like to paraphrase I think, the three big themes that I got from this. The first, thank you so much, is kind of like your excitement and passion about the implications of the generative AI boom. Just seeing how it's blooming and growing, and talking a little bit about how it was um, obviously initially designed from a data perspective to, I think, the key innovations and understandings that unlocked the explosion, right, of its capabilities, and talking about how it will actually continue advancing in the future. The second that was really interesting was obviously the exploration about what is going to happen to society, from like indie games, for NPCs, all the way to, fake news and, somewhat good news. And I think we talked about how, the AI isn't lying, at least not intentionally yet, but is, trying to make things up, right? And those hallucinations are going to have real life consequences to how we live, operate, and interact with one another. Lastly, we also got to dive into UI testing, from why is it important to how it's currently being done, to how you're looking to automate it, but also drive and enrich it with AI as well. So thank you so much, Eugene, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. It was a blast for me.